And welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. You guys have been asking for today's guest to come on for months now, and I'm so thrilled to have him on the show. I'll give you a little hint. I'm wearing a shirt and some earrings. That's a clue. I don't get to wear this often, so I really appreciate when he comes on the show. Please realize, guys, that whenever we have a doctor on the show, and certain doctors in particular, like Dr. Goldhamer, we get hundreds of questions. We probably won't get to all of them. That's why you've got to send them in advance for priority. All you have to do is sign up to be on my mailing list, chefaj.com. We basically send out one email on the weekend telling you who the guests are. You reply to it, and that's how you get your questions. You see, when you put it in the chat, I don't always see it because I'm streaming to about 7 or 8 places, whereas you're watching one place. So my chat looks very different and it disappears within minutes. So the best chance to get a live question asked is to be watching on YouTube rather than any other platform, because that's where I actually see it. Always put 4 questions before. But again, please submit your questions in advance. So I would imagine if you're watching me, you're familiar with Dr. Alan Goldhamer. But if you're not, I would refer you to the wonderful podcast he did with Rich Roll that has now over 2.4 million views. Dr. Alan Goldhamer is the co-founder of the TrueNorth Health Center. I believe it's been there over 40 years now, and he has medically supervised water fasts and healing of tens of thousands of patients. He's a co-author of probably the best book I've ever read on the subject, The Pleasure Trap, which I believe he actually conceived the title of. Please welcome Dr. Alan Goldhamer to the show. I'm so happy you're back.
Hi, AJ.
How are you, Dr. Goldhamer?
Good.
Good. Now, I'm sure we have many, many questions, but just in case, the off chance this is somebody's first meeting you watching this video, you conceived the idea of, well, maybe not the idea of the pleasure trap, but the title. And you often say that we live in a world that's designed to make us fat, sick, and miserable. Can you please just elaborate a little bit about that and this concept of the pleasure trap and why it's so important?
Yeah, the pleasure trap's this hidden force that undermines health and happiness. And as you said, it's the reason why people are overweight. And when people become overweight, they develop metabolic syndrome. And when they develop metabolic syndrome, they're more vulnerable to dying from heart disease, from cancer, autoimmune diseases, lymphoma, and even something like COVID-19. The reason why some people get sick and die versus, recover from illnesses is because of their vulnerability. And dietary excess is one of the major contributing factors to making us vulnerable. And the pleasure trap explains how that happens, why that happens, and more importantly, what you need to do to deal with that. There's a neurochemical in the brain called dopamine that induces a response we know of as pleasure. So the more dopamine is secreted by the brain, the more pleasure there is. And it turns out, because people evolved in an environment of scarcity, we were designed to crave the most concentrated foods available to us, to get enough to eat, to not get eaten. That's like the biological imperative of life. So what happened is we invented highly processed foods, which stimulate dopamine production in our brain. So they give us more dopamine, more pleasure. And so we overeat them. And that's true for humans and all the other animals on the planet. And so we're fooling the brain essentially. And we're being trapped by this pleasure response into systematically overeating. And that's essentially why people are fat, sick, and miserable. And so the pleasure trap is helping people understand that and develop strategies so they can reverse that. And that's why we have patients that are able to lose weight, reverse chronic disease, and maintain optimum health. Now, sometimes people have trouble doing that on their own. That's just like some people have trouble quitting drinking. And so, there are places set up to help people decide to quit drinking and to sustain that. And TrueNorth Health Center is a place where people that are having trouble escaping the pleasure trap can come, undergo fasting, which is just a quicker way of giving the body a chance to reboot, and then adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet with sleep and exercise so they can get and stay healthy.
Nice. But Dr. Goldhamer, it seems that more people are overweight or obese than in any other timeline in human history, and more people are even morbidly obese now. So what has really changed?
Well, we've gotten better at artificially stimulating dopamine in our brain as we've gotten more highly processed foods. And so as we change the diet, we change the pleasure trap vulnerability and we increase obesity. Now, 2/3 of people are overweight or obese, which just means that people are getting access to these artificially concentrated foods. Virtually everybody that eats those foods will, to one degree or another, develop obesity or excess weight. In fact, the amazing thing is that only 2/3 of people are overweight or obese. I'm surprised, actually, it's not even higher. Now, give it a few more years and we will get a higher percentage, but it's taking longer than I would have expected to trap, a large percentage of the population in the pleasure trap.
But do you think it's mostly the animal products, it's the processed food, it's the combination? If you had to point to like one thing.
Yeah, it's the chemicals that we add to our feed that fool our brains and lead to overeating that are the main problems. And those chemicals are salt, oil, and sugar. So, SOS, that's what we talk about, an SOS-free diet. Salt, oil, and sugar are not actually food, but there's chemicals, highly processed fractionated food products that we add to food. And again, it's not just humans. If you do it to rats or birds will get so fat they can't fly. Rats will increase their body weight 49% in 60 days. So these chemicals have very powerful effects. And we put more and more and more of these chemicals in our feed because we like the way it makes it taste, because liking the way it makes it taste is largely dependent on how much dopamine is produced in the brain. So the more stimulation of dopamine, the more we like it. So we just keep inventing ways of getting the food more and more and more concentrated.
Let's just say hypothetically, we only ate animal products without sugar, oil, or salt, or processed food without that. I mean, that still wouldn't be good, right?
Well, it wouldn't be good, but for other reasons. You wouldn't have the obesity as a main issue. Animal foods, when you're talking about whole animal foods, aren't the same as pleasure trap, highly processed fractionated foods. The problem with animal foods, though, well, there's a number of problems. Number one, this idea of biological concentration. Animals accumulate the toxins from their environment day after day after week after month. So when you kill and eat an animal, you get its entire lifetime accumulation of toxins. So in terms of the PCB, the dioxin, the pesticide residues, the chemicals, these are much more concentrated in animal foods than plant-based foods. In fact, they can have anywhere from 2 to 1,000 times the concentration per calorie. And so in terms of toxicity, animal foods are definitely an issue. Also, you can die because of, bacterial contamination. If you don't cook the meat enough, the bacteria that live on the meat can also live in you. And as a consequence, they can make you vulnerable and can kill you. That's why you have health departments and all kinds of rules to carefully handle this meat because it can be so deadly. The other problem is, of course, people argue it's not just your own personal health, but also the moral, ethical, and spiritual aspects of eating animal foods. Some people believe that it's not nice to take sentient creatures and torture them all their life and then kill them and eat them. And as a consequence, there's lots of people arguing. In fact, most vegans, I think, argue for veganism based on cruelty to animals. Some people think it would be nice to save the planet's ability to host humans. And they know that animal husbandry is responsible for more methane production, more global warming factors than the internal combustion engine. And so the idea is, okay, maybe we should save the animals, or maybe we should save the planets. I personally argue maybe we should save the people. And the people are not being saved by making animal products a primary component in their diet.
Okay, great. We ready for some questions?
Always.
Nice. Okay, so the first one comes from Dan, and he wants to know, he says, is Dr. Goldhamer familiar with the fasting product service Prolon, 5-day mimicking fast? Does he feel it's worthwhile? If not, why not? They claim that people lose more than 5 pounds doing their 5-day product.
Right. So as far as Prolon, yes, I'm familiar with it. Walter Longo, who is a brilliant scientist from USC, has done a lot of research on intermittent fasting, suggests that people take this product of his 5 days a month. He doesn't talk about diet the other 25 days, but just not eating crap 5 days a month and taking his 750 calories instead results in progressive health improvement. As you can imagine, that's 15% of the time less eating greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh processed foods. The products in Prolon are highly processed, so I don't know that you'd want to make those the staple of your diet. However, the idea of reducing calories obviously has substantial potential benefit. Walter Longo also wrote a book on fasting where he said, don't do long-term fasting because it might be too dangerous. But the caveat and the exception was if you did it at the TrueNorth Health Center. And since I evaluate other scientists' intelligence based on how much they agree with me, that makes Walter Longo a genius. And so I really like the work he's done on intermittent fasting. It's really put fasting in the mainstream scientific literature. And so I think he's done a great service with that. As far as the specific benefits of his specific proprietary product, you can look at his literature, and he does a good job of explaining, what he's recommending and why. I think rather than doing intermittent fasting 5 days a month and trying to eat ad libitum the other 25 days, I think a better solution might be just eating a health promoting vegan SOS-free diet every single day. Fasting 16 hours every day, that is limiting your feeding window to 8 hours for those of us trying to maintain or lose weight. And just that little bit of fasting apparently induces changes over a long period of time, which can be highly beneficial, and it may help prevent overeating. The key to that whole process is not eating 3 to 4 hours before you go to sleep at night, so that you sleep well and you're not eating calories that are going to be converted to fat, because you're not going to have an opportunity to burn them.
Well, I'm looking it up, and when I Google it, it says that it costs about $179 to $249 for 5 days, so $50 a day.
Well, that benefit, though, there is a benefit to that. If you spend $250 for that, you may not have that much money left, and then you wouldn't be able to go out and buy greasy, fatty, processed junk food and processed food. So maybe that's part of the benefit, is depleting people's resources so that they don't have the opportunity to purchase foods that are expensive and that they shouldn't be eating.
I mean, it appears from what I can tell that when I looked up the nutritional information, that much of it, if not all of it, is vegan, but it has oil and salt and flour. I mean, couldn't somebody just do their own idea of this by eating 750 calories at home?
Yes, that would be another option. The argument that's made by the folks that are promoting Prolon is that they've specifically and proprietarily constituted the percentage of calories from fat, sugar, and oil so that it will have an accentuated benefit. And as I said, they've published a bunch of literature. You can look at their claims and judge for yourself.
Well, I think I could do a lot with that $250. But the person asking the question says, but don't you think it's like a great jump start, to do Prolon? Won't it help my microbiome and things like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of products out there, and a lot of claims that are made. This one has a little bit more, I think, research behind their arguments, and I would recommend people look at that, and they can decide for themselves if that's the right product for them.
I mean, you could go, because you sell the food at the TrueNorth Health Center. You could think about how much actually good health promoting food you could buy for $250.
Right. You have to have people that are willing to eat health promoting food. And at first, when you give people food that's free of salt, oil, and sugar, and they're addicted to the artificial stimulation of dopamine that comes from eating highly processed foods, healthy foods may not be that appealing. That's one of the reasons we like fasting, AJ, is after fasting, good food tastes good. In fact, we've done a study on taste and adaptation where we actually show that the minimal threshold detection of salt and sugar changes after fasting, and that person's hedonic response to salty, fatty, and sweet fatty foods changes, so that good foods start to taste good post-fasting. But not everybody's able or willing to, clear out their palate, break their addiction, and adopt a health-promoting diet. But for those of us that do, yes, obviously, then you don't need to be investing in highly processed, concentrated food byproducts in order to be able to do intermittent fasting protocols, because you're eating healthy every single day.
Great. Thank you. Next question is from Janice. I've lost quite a bit of weight thanks to you, 40 pounds after a breast cancer diagnosis and subsequent treatment. I'm working to modify what I can do to reduce the risk for recurrence, but frustrated that I'm not seeing the menopause middle budge. I know the visceral fat is dangerous. What are the best recommendations to rid stubborn menopause middle?
Yeah, well, one of the things we've just done is we've just finished a study. It's been published. People can find it on our website, fasting.org. And it looks at body composition changes during fasting. We used a DEXA scanner to evaluate what happens to people. And what's exciting is we always know when people go on a fast, they lose weight. And when people go on a health promoting diet, they lose weight. And some of that weight is adipose tissue. Some of that weight is the type of fat, visceral fat, that's thought to be most health compromising. And what we found in fasting is that not only do people lose fat, they preferentially lose visceral fat. And that what's exciting is after fasting, in this study we've just done, the weight loss, obviously you lose weight when you fast, you regain when you come off fast. but the weight you regain after fasting was protein, fiber, water, and glycogen, not fat. The fat loss continued, and the visceral fat loss continued. And so at the end of 6 weeks after follow-up from fasting, our subjects not only had lost substantial amounts of fat, even disproportionately more visceral fat, but the weight they gained after fasting was exclusively water, protein, glycogen, and fiber. It was not fat. The fat loss continued. And at the end of 6 weeks, their lean tissue mass was actually higher than when they started, before they started fasting. And the fat and visceral fat loss continued, and to the point where some subjects lost as much as 50% of their visceral fat within the 2-week period and subsequent follow-up.
That'd be great. So that might be something she would consider. Thank you. Okay, this is from David. I eat a whole food plant-based SOS-free diet. I sometimes feel a lack of energy while hiking. Does our body release the fat into the blood, causing temporarily a less efficient absorption of glucose? In short, where does visceral fat go?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. When you burn fat, whether it's visceral fat or adipose tissue, it's oxidized into energy through a process called lipolysis, so an enzymatically driven process. So you're designed to be able to store fat when excess calories are available and to burn fat as needed. I'm not sure. So I think that answers the what happens to fat, but I'm not sure. The beginning part of the question wasn't clear on. You're saying in terms of the fatigue issue?
Yeah, that he says he follows this diet. He seems to have less energy when hiking.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the literature on endurance and endurance athletes, it's really quite the opposite. People that adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet tend to have enhanced endurance. So I wonder if there's not something else going on in terms of deconditioning effect or some other issue. If the reader's interested, we have a service that they could take advantage of. They could go onto my website at healthpromoting.com, complete the registration forms to get me his medical history, and call me, and there's a no-cost conversation with me, and I'll try to answer his question. If I can't, I can at least refer him to a doctor that can get into the details with him and maybe provide him an intelligent response about what the fatigue-related issue is. I don't think it's going to have to do with eating a healthy diet, but it may have to do with whether you're eating enough, absorbing enough, or there's some other issue, that may explain the problems with fatigue.
Great, thank you. This question is from Karen. Should people take a collagen supplement for bone health? What is the best way to improve bone density?
Yeah, I wouldn't be recommending in general circumstances the use of supplements for, quote, for bone health. But what you do want to remember is that you want to be eating a whole plant food SOS-free diet that's rich in minerals. So that means rich in vegetables. You want to be getting weight-bearing exercise, because that's one of the most important things for building bone strength. If you don't use it, you kind of lose it. And then mostly you want to avoid the things that leach calcium out of the bones, like the use of coffee and sodas and animal foods in particular, high sulfur amino acid foods like meat, fish, fowl, eggs, and dairy products, as well as alcohol and other substances. So by not doing the bad stuff and eating the health promoting stuff, getting regular weight-bearing exercise and abundant sleep, the only other thing you might want to be very aware of when it comes to bone health is vitamin D levels. And fortunately, when you're out exercising, you usually get enough sun exposure, you can make enough vitamin D, but it is worth checking vitamin D levels. And if they're low, then supplementing vitamin D may be advisable, because low D can help prevent your body from absorbing and maintaining calcium where it needs to be inside the bone. So fix the D, lower the protein intake, and increase the high mineral content foods, get plenty of sleep and weight-bearing exercise, and stop leaching calcium out of your bones by drinking things like coffee and soda and eating animal foods that are so detrimental. The other thing is hormonal balance, especially in women, having normal neuroendocrine function, normal like thyroid function, for example. Hyperthyroidism leads to osteoporosis. So you want to make sure that the bacteria in your gut, the microbiome that convert estradiol to estriol and allow your hormone balance to be normalized, is optimized. And the way you do that is eat a healthy diet, get plenty of sleep and exercise, And if things are out of whack and diet's not working quick enough, consider the idea of medically supervised fasting.
Yep. Thank you. This is from Sue. She asks, have you seen improvement in someone's toenail fungus after fasting?
Yeah, fungus can be really persistent and difficult. So yes, some people do get significant improvement, but some people don't. And the problem with fungus is you've got an organism living in an area that's not necessarily seen as a big threat to the body. So the body's not going to necessarily mount some massive, defense attempt. So there's lots of treatments that are advocated. Some of them are pretty toxic. The medications that you use to treat systemic fungus also require you to test your liver function tests. And so the drugs can work, but they're not without their risks. There are topical applications of medications as well as naturopathic things that are purported to work. They're kind of slow. You have to be pretty patient and combine them with nail hygiene. And fasting certainly can be helpful in general at rebooting the body's immune response, but it's not like it's some magic specific treatment that always resolves the issues, depending how deep-seated the problem is. There's also some newer treatments that are using application of laser and other things that are thought to be less toxic, and they have some purported benefits, at least for some people. So I don't think there's an easy one-thing-fix-all answer for everybody on that nail fungus issue.
Great. Thank you. All right. This is from Carol. She says her friend, who is 60, was diagnosed with stage 3 lung cancer, although never a smoker. Doctor wants to do a month of chemo and another thinks she needs 6 months of chemo. Would she be a good candidate for fasting at TrueNorth? If not, what other advice can you offer?
Yeah, so lung cancer is a difficult condition. There is evidence that when lung cancer is surgically treatable, that is, they can remove a lobe or a lesion, that there may be enhanced benefit in terms of how long people live. So I wouldn't rule out, at least talking to your physician about whether or not the lesion you have is early enough and contained enough that there might be a medical management option there. The question you always want to ask your oncologist if they're recommending chemo or radiation is to share with you the evidence that they're relying on that shows that people either live longer or better if they get treatment. And, many times it's a little bit disappointing when you look at the articles, if they're willing to share with you the information they're basing their recommendation on, people don't actually live longer or better with or without treatment. So it's not always a black and white, easy to resolve decision. Because if you're not going to live longer and you're not going to live better, why would you expose yourself to, health compromising treatment? On the other hand, as I said, there is evidence that at least surgery, in some cases, it does enhance survival. So, it's not always medicine is good or medicine is bad, but you really have to get in and take a look at what the available evidence suggests. And sometimes you need help with that. And we have doctors at the TrueNorth Health Center that are medical doctors that are not idiots and that have an experience of patients actually recovering and getting well. And so it might be worth use our telemedicine systems and consult with one of those doctors, and they can review your medical history and give you some coaching and maybe help you figure out what questions to ask your oncologist so you can make an informed decision about if you want to do medical treatment or not. As far as fasting can be utilized to improve your health, and it might even be utilized to minimize the negative effects of medical treatment that you decide to undertake. There's evidence that when people do fasting in conjunction with chemotherapy, for example, the benefits of chemotherapy are enhanced and some of the negative effects can be minimized. Walter Longo, the gentleman you mentioned earlier, has done some studies, particularly animal-based studies, showing that fasting can dramatically enhance cancer-free survival and minimize the effect of chemotherapy because of something called differential stress sensitivity and differential stress sensitization. The idea that cancer cells are more vulnerable to chemotherapy in the fasting state because they aren't as flexible as adapting to a ketogenic environment, an environment without the sugar. They have these higher metabolic rate than normal cells. And so they're more vulnerable to that alteration of the environment that fasting induces. So lots of complicated questions that come up when you decide what do you want to do or not do. The good news is once you decide what you do or don't want to do medically, the diet and lifestyle stuff is always relevant. Health promoting diet, exercise, sleep, stress reduction. These are the things that boost the immune response and give yourself a better chance of healing, whether it's with or without medical treatment.
Is it always worth a chance though? I mean, like if, I'm in my 60s, and if I don't go to a vegan doctor, they're always pushing me for mammograms and colonoscopies. And I'm like, why? Even if I had cancer, I'm not going to do any of the treatment.
Well, wait a second though. Let's talk about that. Colonoscopy, for example, if you do a colonoscopy and you discover polyps can be successfully treated surgically. And people that remove polyps have a lower incidence of getting cancer and are going to live longer on average. So that's an example of a medical treatment, unpleasant though that it may be, that actually has evidence that suggests it might make you live longer. So I don't know that we can completely rule that out. Also, let's say you do something and you discover, okay, something's not quite right. Maybe that motivates you to adopt a health promoting diet and lifestyle. For you, AJ, you're already doing a health promoting diet and lifestyle. So trying to intimidate you with some medical diagnosis isn't going to really improve your diet and lifestyle compliance. So it may be less relevant to you, but there's a lot of people out there that are not yet living optimally. And so sometimes, getting that diagnosis, even if the treatment itself may not help them, just kind of getting in touch with their own mortality can be helpful because it motivates them to do what you're already doing.
What the point I was trying to make is if I were to get a cancer diagnosis, I wouldn't do conventional treatment. I would take a chance and go to TrueNorth. So my question is, isn't it always worth a chance?
I think it depends on the treatment, though. There are some cancers where treatment doesn't really help people live longer or better. So I'm would question doing them. But there are other ones where treatment might actually be helpful. We just talked about lung cancer. Lung cancer is a very serious condition. It's not necessarily going to be responsive to conservative measures alone. And so the question always comes back to, if I do X, Y, or Z treatment, is there evidence that I may live longer or live better, have better quality of life than I would if I didn't? And if you're having trouble getting adequate answers from your own doctors, then talk to some of our doctors that maybe can look at both sides and help you decide that.
Right. I was trying to say, are there just certain people that shouldn't even bother to try fasting, that it's just like,
there are people where fasting might be more stressful than beneficial. For example, if you have a patient in a cachexic state of disease where they're, and you put them on a fast, they may die sooner than they would have died had you tried to provide appropriate nutritional support. In fact, sometimes in the past, fasting has been used kind of as hospice care, because when people fast and they die, they tend to die more peacefully than sometimes, in the fed state. We don't do that at TrueNorth Health Center. We have a rule: if you walk in, we want you to be able to walk out. So, we're not providing that kind of care. But the point is, I don't think fasting is for everybody. And there's a number of people that shouldn't fast. If you're pregnant or lactating, for example, and you fast, you're going to lose your milk production. That's not going to be a good thing. If you've recently had a pulmonary embolism or a deep vein thrombosis or a heart attack or stroke, you may be on anticoagulant therapy. And you don't want to just arbitrarily discontinue that in order to be able to fast. So there's a number of conditions and situations where fasting would be contraindicated. So I wouldn't just say, oh, no matter what it is, I'll just fast. I don't think that's probably a fair, assessment.
Okay, well, good. Thanks. All right, let me find some more questions. There's so many. This one is from Brenda. Is there science in regards to certain body types or people with certain metabolisms having a harder time being able to lose weight and keep the weight off?
Yeah, let's think about weight. In the world of our ancient ancestors, people that stored weight easily survived. That's your ancestors. Your ancestors got on a boat ride with a bunch of other people, and it was too long, and everybody died except the people that were able to store fat. They're the winners. They're the people who passed on their genes. They're likely your ancient relatives. Your relatives got on the boat. They didn't die. They survived. They probably ate everybody else for all we know. But the bottom line is, being able to store fat is a biological benefit. So people that gain weight easily, what does that mean? It means they have good plumbing. It means they absorb what they eat. And in a natural setting, they'd be the survivors. But in this modern world of the pleasure trap, it turns out to be a disadvantage because it's easier to get fat, and storing excess fat, which never happened in nature consistently, makes us vulnerable to dying from these new modern diseases like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and autoimmune diseases. Things that used to be rare are now common because people that had good genes for the ancient world those genes aren't working so well in an environment, the modern recent environment where dietary excess is the rule. So, but don't feel like because you get fat easily, that's a bad thing. That's a good thing biologically. It's just you live in an environment that's not well situated for those particular stellar genes. And so, it's not the fat that's the problem. It's the diet that makes you fat that's the problem. And the moment you change that diet, even with your good genes, your fat will start coming off. You will slowly and consistently lose weight. Now, if you happen to be somebody in our society, there are some people that have really efficient fat storage systems. These people are called females or women. And women are energy conserving fat storage devices, biologically speaking, because they have to survive a period of biological vulnerability called pregnancy. And they are rich in estrogen, a fat storage hormone. It's interesting, if you inject that estrogen into men, they get fat, they grow breasts and hips. If you inject women with testosterone, the male hormone, they lose their fat, but then they get hairy and get cancer and die. So it's not a good weight loss strategy. But the point is, these differences in males and females are biological. That's why it's much harder on average, everything else being equal, for women to lose weight than men to lose weight. They have to work harder. There's also social reasons why it's harder. But the bottom line is, I think we need to stop seeing getting fat as a biological breakdown and realize it's a biological benefit. But the problem is you are much more vulnerable to the effects of the dietary pleasure trap. So you have to work twice as hard in order to avoid the consequence of dietary excess. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just a lot harder. And, there's nothing we can do to change that biological reality. We just have to understand it, adapt, and develop strategies to be more successful.
Right. Thank you. You've seen people do it.
I see people do it. What's interesting, AJ, now we have some of the first data coming out with not just short-term, but long-term follow-up data. In fact, we have a study that we did with the Mayo Clinic with 30 subjects where we brought them in, we fasted them, we refed them, we got them at 6 weeks, and now we've got them at 1 year. And so we're able to show that not only can people maintain their normal blood pressure and whatnot, but we've looked at dietary adherence and we're showing what they're able to do and sustain in terms of long-term dietary compliance. And, we have 28 of the 30 subjects that we've got available follow-up data on. And it's very interesting. I'm very excited to release this data. Now, that doesn't mean everybody can do it, but at least highly motivated people that are willing to do really radical things like eat well and exercise and go to bed on time are not only able to get well, but they can sustain that over the long term.
Nice. Thanks. And here's a question. When refeeding after a fast, do you recommend a good amount of fiber in the diet, especially those first few days, or do you recommend gradually building up the fiber in the diet?
That depends on the patient. If you have a person with a history of ulcerative colitis, that you may not be able to put a lot of raw cellulose into that without irritating that colon, depending how long they fasted and how much recovery they've made. And so in those patients, we may use more steamed vegetables and vegetable juices and things without so much fiber to keep the colon and allow it to adapt to refeeding. Whereas in most people, we want that stimulation to the digestive system. So we're going to break, once they're off, they're fresh, they do their water fast, they get a little bit of juice to fire things up. Then we give them raw fruits and vegetables. And that vegetable cellulose will initiate peristalsis and bowel activity. It's low caloric density, high nutrient density food. So it allows them to replenish themselves without risking refeeding syndrome or any of the problems from overalimentation coming off the fast. So you do have to modify the refeeding depending on the medical history of the patient that's undergone fasting. And also it depends how long they fasted. If they fasted for 16 hours, then there's no dietary modification necessary. You do that every single day. On the other hand, if you fasted for 40 days, now it's going to be a very progressive refeeding. A person that fasts a long period of time needs, a day of juice for every week of fasting, a day of raw foods for every week of fasting. It might take them half the length of the fast just to be able to recover and reestablish normal digestive function.
Great, thank you. This question I hear a lot from Sandy. Is chewing sugar-free gum harmful, and does it interfere with weight loss?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it is harmful, and it may be a negative effect on health. One thing you want to remember is the chewing mechanism itself stimulates digestive secretions. And so constantly chewing is not a normal process. You're not a cow. You're not designed to be chewing your cud and chewing all day long. And as a consequence, overstimulating that may have potential negative effects. Plus, the chemicals they put in that chewing gum, even the quote sugarless chewing gum, can be highly detrimental and can impact the gut microbiome as well. So I would not suggest chewing gum or chewing anything all day long, but chewing thoroughly during the time that you have your 3 meals a day in that 8 to 12 hour feeding window.
Great, thank you. This is from Sharon. Can eating plant-based help with my diabetes and chronic kidney disease? I'm on insulin and it doesn't seem to be working now.
Yeah, so if you're still making adequate insulin, and you can determine that with a blood test like a C-peptide test, then it's the vast majority of people will eventually be able to reduce their insulin resistance enough to eliminate the need for medication and insulin. And we've definitely seen that at TrueNorth Health Center. Now, if you use fasting, you can speed that process up, but you have to be very careful with fasting because you have to make sure, number one, people are actually producing insulin, which is necessary to adapt the fasting process. And they're producing enough insulin that they don't get into a ketoacidotic state that would be, very serious or life-threatening health consequences. Also very important in diabetics that you don't fast on medication. The big risk in diabetes is actually hypoglycemic crisis, even more than hyperglycemic crisis. So taking medications while fasting would be very dangerous. Having said that, though, if people are willing to do the diet, the exercise, and get adequate sleep, most diabetics, as they get closer to optimum weight, also get close to optimum blood sugar levels. Now, some people have destroyed the islets of Langerhans in their pancreas. They don't make enough insulin. These are type 1 diabetics. They're not going to be able to adapt to fasting well. They're not going to be able to eliminate the need for exogenous insulin. But it doesn't mean they don't improve their health by adopting a whole plant food SOS-free diet. They will. They'll reduce their insulin resistance. They can get stable on much lower levels of insulin. But now that insulin becomes a true replacement therapy and wouldn't be able to be eliminated.
Perfect. Thanks. This is from Doug, not Doug Lyle, but somebody named Doug. Have you experienced people recovering from leukemia by following your protocol? If so, can you please share an encouraging story?
Yeah. So we do see patients with leukemia that are better managed on a health promoting diet and lifestyle than not. I don't really believe in the idea of cure, in the sense whether it's leukemia or lymphoma or even obesity. There's no cure really for any of these things. There's management strategies. In other words, you can lose the weight and keep it off, but if you go back to eating greasy, fatty, slimy processed foods, you're going to get fat again. So you didn't cure your obesity, you just managed it with a health promoting diet and lifestyle. And the same thing's true with leukemia, that people that adopt health promoting diet and lifestyle, use fasting appropriately, oftentimes do notice improvements in blood sugar levels and improve stability. But I don't think it's cured, because I'm quite confident those same people going back to the things that caused the problem to begin with would likely reestablish the condition. We have published some papers on lymphoma, and people can go to fasting.org and look at those studies, and you can see how incredibly effective diet and fasting has been. In fact, the very first patient we published in the British Medical Journal, we did a 3-year follow-up, and now we have a 6-year follow-up, and she continues to be cancer-free. And so we're very excited about that. We've had a number of patients since then that we're in the process of tracking and trying to establish good outcome data. So ultimately, we can do a clinical trial and show that fasting and diet work better than the conventional chemotherapeutic approaches.
Great, thanks. Okay, this is from, the name, I can't figure it out, but the person saying a lot of their 60-year-old non-vegan, sad-eating friends started taking collagen supplements. Is there any reason or benefit from consuming collagen from animal sources?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of collagen supplementation. I think there's a lot of claims and ideas out there. I'd like to see data that actually supports it. And in the case of collagen, I haven't seen that.
Okay, great. Thanks.
I think a lot of people think if they eat collagen, it's going to somehow magically turn into new collagen, and that, that's going to solve their joint pain or whatever it is. And I think for a lot of people, they should remember that a lot of their chronic joint pain is inflammation, and it's secondary to their diet, particularly animal-rich diets and processed food diets and obesity. At TrueNorth Health, it's really interesting. People come in, and the chiropractors that treat a lot of these joint conditions say you have to treat people right away, quickly, because if you wait till they're done fasting, there's nothing left to treat. And so often just reducing inflammation, getting rid of the edematous swelling that comes from the salt intake, is enough to reduce joint pain and get people feeling quite well. We have significant and consistent results in helping people with chronic joint pain. And a lot of it happens again before we can even begin to start physical therapy or manipulative therapy.
Well, if eating collagen builds strong bones, then maybe we should eat brains to get smarter.
Yeah, well, that's the same kind of thinking. And, and maybe if we stretch people, maybe they'll grow taller, but,
Or if we eat testicles, we'll grow a pair of balls. What can I say? Right. All righty then. I guess you didn't think that was funny. Suzanne says, do you know of a retirement facility that serves plant-based meals? My husband is 87 years old, doing pretty well with his Parkinson's, diagnosed 8 years ago. I believe the late diagnosis is due to his eating a plant-based diet for the last 35 years and being an avid exerciser. But I realized that we may not be able to stay in our home indefinitely. Maybe you could have a subsidiary of TrueNorth. Like, wouldn't that be cool? Where you could
We've been approached by a number of people that are interested in offering senior housing options for people that want to live healthfully. I also thought it might be interesting if we got one of some of your colleagues in the reality TV business, AJ, to go into one of these chain nursing homes and split the population in half and give half of them their conventional food and then the other half a whole plant food SOS-free diet, and then track them over 2 years. Because I suggest what you'd see is that the death rate would drop dramatically, that people would start to recover, drug usage would be different. It would be a rather dramatic reality TV show to show the difference that happens as people adopt a whole plant food SOS-free diet. How many people check out by dying and how many people check out by recovering? I think that it could be quite dramatic. So maybe you'll talk to some of your colleagues and see if somebody's interested in putting on a program like that, because I think it'd be pretty dramatic. And then if it was successful, there'd be enough demand that many of these chain senior housing properties that are developing might be able to offer a whole plant food SOS-free diet as a true option.
Wow. But I think it'd be a great idea for somebody to start a business like that,
Absolutely. I think the demand would be high.
For people like us. Okay, so Aaron asks, I've never had any chiropractic work done before. I'm 45 years old and have a consistent yoga practice since my early 30s. Can someone like me get through the rest of their life without ever seeing a chiropractor if they stay active and limber?
Absolutely. Health results from healthful living. So diet, sleep, exercise, stretch and strengthening. And if you're fortunate enough not to have injuries that cause, joint dysfunction, then, that would be the ideal, is not having to see doctors of any kind. However, some people have injuries. Some people also have chronic misuse, and they develop a hypermobility or intersegmental joint dysfunction. And that can be benefited with a combination of diet, exercise, stretching, and in some cases, manipulative therapy. You can get bigger changes quicker in some cases by using appropriate chiropractic or osteopathic care. But again, if you're doing well and you have a good yoga practice and a good diet, the goal is to live in such a way that you don't need to see any of us if possible.
Great. Makes sense. All right. Next question. Oh, sorry. There's just so many, trying to get to them all. This is from Denise. What, if any, are the long-term effects of taking levothyroxine medicine for hypothyroidism?
Yeah.
Are there foods you absolutely should avoid?
Well, too much thyroid replacement can be very health compromising. It'll associate with osteoporosis and other diseases. So you definitely do not want to be on excess intake of these thyroid replacement therapies. However, not having adequate thyroid function can also associate with, significant symptoms and quality of life issues. So when you're going to do thyroid replacement therapy, if it's done with appropriate testing, monitoring, and in conjunction with a health promoting diet and lifestyle, minimal replacement therapy will result in minimal damage from replacement therapy. If you're not willing to do the diet and lifestyle change, then you can expect that there will be increasing need for replacement therapy and then the consequences of those side effects. So
this is a fun question. I love this question. Why does Dr. Goldhamer always wear black?
Because at one point, Chef AJ told me that I could only wear black because it was the only color that fit my personality. And then I went out and Charles Thwaite had a sale. And so I got some black shirts. And now I find it's really convenient because I never have to listen to my lovely wife say, "You're not going to wear that with that, are you?" And have to make decisions. And it also saves a lot of time because I always have one decision to make in the morning: put on the shirt, put on the pants, and that's it. And everything always goes with everything. And like I say, if you wait, every once in a while there's a sale, and so you can save a bunch of money too.
Wow. Well, I think it really does suit you. She would like to know, can fasting help to lower high blood pressure?
Yeah, in fact, we've done a number of studies. We've done our original study, medically supervised water-only fasting and treatment of hypertension. We took 174 consecutive patients with high blood pressure, and all of them were able to achieve low enough pressure to eliminate the need for medication. And more recently, we've just published a study that we did with our colleagues at the Mayo Clinic on the treatment of high blood pressure. We just released the results of that study in our newsletter. It's on our websites. You can go to healthpromoting.com or fasting.org and download the study for yourself. And the results are really quite phenomenal. Not only do people normalize their blood pressure, but also their cardiometabolic risk factors are also normalized. All of the lipid levels, the numbers are quite spectacular. And they're sustained. The study that's been published has 6-week follow-up. The study that'll be coming out later in the year has 1 year follow-up. But essentially, if you have high blood pressure and it's essential hypertension, which is, the majority of people that have high blood pressure, there's not some limiting kidney disease or something, you can expect your blood pressure will normalize and you will eliminate the need for medication if you're willing to use diet, exercise, and when appropriate, fasting. That is true in the vast majority of people. And we have the largest effect sizes that have ever been shown in treating high blood pressure and using fasting and diet in the treatment of high blood pressure. And we've been able to prove that now. And if you look at our papers, the data is clear, compelling, and now it's been reproduced. So we believe that it's absolutely accurate.
Great. Thank you. This is from Heidi. My blood work shows that my B12 is very high. My doctor said to lower my dosage. I was taking 2 micrograms every other day. Now I'm taking 2 micrograms weekly, divided into 3 doses. Does that sound like enough? And does it matter if the B12 is in liquid or capsule form?
Yeah, I would recommend if you take it in capsule form, at least get it in from a company that uses vegan capsules rather than taking gelatin, just in a general principle of trying to stay vegan. We use the company Pure Encapsulations. They're very vegan, supportive. So, that they have it both in liquid form or in a vegan caplet form. We recommend 1,000 micrograms a day will meet virtually all vegans' needs for B12. The problem is that some people have very poor absorption, some people have good absorption, but 1,000 micrograms a day is a safe dosage. It's true, you can probably get significantly less. The disadvantage of going less is that just means you need to test once a year just to make sure that your levels are appropriate. And you can either do methylmalonic acid or you can do homocysteine. Those are both sensitive indicators of B12 status.
Dr. Goldhamer, where can people see your high blood pressure study that you referred to?
If you go to healthpromoting.com, all of our studies are located on that website, are freely available, or you can go to the TrueNorth Health Foundation's fasting compendium website, fasting.org. And also those studies and all the new studies are published and readily available. For people that contact the center and we put their email, give us their email address, we put them on our free newsletter and we send out links to all the new studies when they come out. But again, you can just go to either of the websites and you can look at all of our studies on high blood pressure and everything else that we've done. We've become quite prolific. We've had 3 papers come out just recently. We have 3 more coming out later in the year.
Great. Joy says her vitamin D went from 31 to 52 by taking 3,000 international units of vitamin D 3 times a week. Her doctor wants her to continue, but Dr. McDougall says that taking vitamin D causes fractures. Is there a lot of evidence of that happening?
Well, excess of vitamin D can definitely cause problems. So we don't want you to have excess of vitamin D levels. But fortunately, it's an easy blood test. You test 25-dehydroxyvitamin D in the blood. We know that the levels should be between 30 and 70, I think is a general consensus. If it's higher than that, then we would definitely not want to see that. We do see people coming in, instead of taking 1 drop a day, they're taking a drop or full a day. And so they'll get levels very high in the 200, 300, and this can become detrimental and make bones vulnerable to fracture or other problems. We don't want to do that. So, that's why we recommend people work with doctors that are not idiots, that can advise them specifically. And we're fortunate that we have medical doctors, naturopaths, chiropractors, osteopaths, and psychologists that are readily available to people now. And this advent of the Zoom and phone coaching has been great because now our doctors can support people all over the world.
Great. This question from Chris maybe would be right for Dr. Lyle, who's going to be on next week, but I'll run it by you because you might know. Can Dr. Goldhamer provide non-pharmaceutical strategies or other recommendations to ease depression, which has been exacerbated by the pandemic? And I can save that for Dr. Lyle if it's more appropriate.
Well, I think Dr. Lyle will have cognitive behavioral therapy suggestions, but there's other things besides behavioral cognitive therapy that are effective at dealing with depression. One, get enough sleep. When you're sleep deprived, you're more vulnerable to depression. Number two, adopt a health promoting SOS-free diet. People that eat a healthy diet have less vulnerability to depression than those that don't. Three, engage in regular aerobic exercise. People that exercise regularly have less vulnerability to depression than people that don't. If appropriate, fasting can be an effective way of helping people, particularly as they're weaning off their medications and trying to reestablish a normal gut microbiome and normal hormonal balance in the body. And then if psychological stress is a significant component, behavioral cognitive therapy may be helpful. That's where Dr. Lyle is really an expert. And he can tell you, how to help address the perspective that people have and how they view the world and how that can profoundly affect their mood state.
Great. This is from Naomi. Have you known anyone who has gone into remission with a dual diagnosis of Crohn's and PSC, primary sclerosing cholangitis?
Yeah. I also wanted to add one thing on that depression business. The thing I wouldn't recommend for most people is antidepressant medication, serotonin inhibitors. And there's a book out there called Anatomy of an Epidemic. It's really worth reading, whether you're thinking about taking medications or you're on medications, because it explains how these drugs deactivate the D2 receptors in your brain and make you vulnerable to acute depression and anxiety when you try to discontinue them. It's very difficult getting off of these drugs for some people. So I would definitely read that book and think about what they have to say. And now, as far as your second point, I've seen many patients with the individual diagnosis. I don't recall offhand if we've had a person with combination. We have to look at the records to see, if that combination has come up recently.
Okay, but you've seen people recover from both of those separately, is what?
Yeah, again, both conditions can recover. Be careful about, again, the concept of cure. It's not like people think, they take a pill and then everything's fine and they can go about doing what they need to do. When you have autoimmune diseases, that means your body's attacking itself. And so in autoimmune disease in general, we have to turn off the problem. And one of the things that turns on autoimmune disease is gut leakage. So people absorb proteins through the gut, and in genetically vulnerable people, the immune system can react to different parts of the body and result in all kinds of inflammatory conditions. So the way we turn that off is we often use fasting to reduce the inflammation in the gut, and then get on a whole plant food SOS-free diet to sustain and minimize that ongoing irritation.
Okay, great. Question from Sue. I've been on a whole food plant-based diet since 2018. I'll be 70 this fall. I exercise 4 to 5 times a week. I had my gallbladder removed in 2015, and I've been taking digestive enzymes made with ox bile powder. Do I need to continue taking digestive enzymes? If yes, what would be best? Vegan enzymes? Can you explain how enzymes work if a person has no gallbladder?
Well, let's be clear. The gallbladder is a holding sac that holds bile that myceliates fat. So the idea is that the gallbladder makes the body more efficient at processing fat. And so people that don't have a gallbladder, the bile squirts directly into the duodenum. It doesn't have the ability to regulate it quite as well. And that's also increases the incidence of people with, say, duodenal cancer is much higher in people that have had cholecystectomy, just because there's nothing to protect that area from the constant leaking of these very acid products. Now, what's interesting is vegetarians only have about 20% of the circulating bile acids that meat eaters do. Because what happens when you're on a greasy, fatty, slimy, dead, decaying flesh diet, your body has to produce massive amounts of bile in order to deal with all this excess surfeit of fat. And so, your body struggles to keep up with it. But the consequence of that is much higher circulating bile acids. And that may be one of the reasons why meat eaters have so much more colon cancer. Because you have all this highly irritating, that bile is that green, yellow, burning stuff that, sometimes people, become aware of. when they're ill or when they're fasting. So reducing your bile acid production is really good, but it means you also have to reduce your excess fat intake. And if you are, for example, on a vegan diet and you're not used to eating big globs of fat all the time, and you go out and eat some meat, you may have some digestive challenges initially because you haven't kicked up all that excess bile acid production. In the long run, that's really good for you, but in the short run, it can cause some distress. And that's why people sometimes get confused because they go on a healthy diet for a while and then they go try to eat some crap and they just don't do well with it. Well, part of the reason is because you adapt to whichever kind of diet you're eating. And if you're on a greasy, fatty, high fat, low fiber diet and you try to eat a bunch of vegetable oils at first, you can get distressed because you have a different microbiome. People that are meat eaters have different bacteria living in their gut than plant eaters. Plant eaters have a much higher diversity. They want ideally up to 1,000 different strain of organisms. And we're talking like 5 pounds of creatures living in your gut. Living creatures swimming around in your digestive system, eating, drinking, and defecating inside you. So if you want to have the kind of organisms that poo fertilizer into you, like vitamin K, rather than TMA, which is trimethylamine oxidase, which is what associates with cancer and other problems, you want to eat on a plant-based diet, not a meat-based diet. But that doesn't mean that when you bounce back and forth, you may not have trouble adapting, to whatever change you're making. So you're going on a plant-based diet, it helps to do that gradually. Rather than go from all meat to all plant overnight and not expect that there's going to be some distress. And if you're on a plant-based diet and for some reason you decided to punish yourself and eat a bunch of meat or dairy or something, don't be surprised that you might have a little trouble adapting to that onslaught because your situation hasn't adapted. Now, if they hack your gallbladder out because probably you're on a high-fat, high-protein diet, got gallstones or damaged that organ in some way, that doesn't mean you can't be healthy. But it means you have to be really careful about fat intake. You may not even be able to eat as much fat from nuts or avocado as somebody that had a gallbladder is. You might have to further restrict your diet, even on the plant-based diet, just to allow your body's ability to digest to work better. Now, some people will suggest digestive enzymes. Well, in some cases, that might be helpful because it can help produce something that the body would normally be producing on their own, but isn't for whatever reason. On the other hand, what might be better is to try to see if you can come up with a diet that's within your digestive capacities before you just jump on the bandwagon of taking enzymes for things that maybe you're not that well equipped to digest. Now, if you're on a good diet and you've done everything you can do, digestive enzymes can be therapeutic and be beneficial. I'm not arguing that. But many people try that before they try actually adopting a healthy diet and lifestyle. And then even if they have to take some enzymes, they may not need as much, just because the demand that they're putting on the digestive system is limited. Other people can do things like chew their food. If you chew your food, you tend to get better digestion than if you swallow it whole. People say to me, well, they chew their food, and I ask them what happens when they eat corn, and they say they see corn in their stools. Well, the corn didn't put itself back together. It's coming out because it never got chewed up. So, that's kind of So again, I'm not arguing that there's never a role for digestive enzymes. I'm just saying treat them like you would any other medications, cautiously, use them appropriately, and you might want to consult with a doctor that's actually used to people getting well so that they can give you a perspective.
Good, thank you. Yeah, corn puts itself back together. That's hilarious. All right. Have you ever noticed though, Dr. Goldhamer, that when I've seen honestly 7 people now that they went on this diet, they lost weight really quickly and then they developed gallstones and had to get their gallbladder out?
Well, actually what happens is that you've got the observation correct, but you've made an error of attribution there, AJ. What happens is when people lose weight through any method, the stones that they've formed over the years getting fat oftentimes get dislodged. It also happens in fasting. People will kick loose gallstones. So the problem is when they kick loose gallstones and they're flushing all this stuff out, it can be very painful. It can be a real problem. So that doesn't mean that's not a reason not to lose weight. You don't say, well, don't lose weight because you might get rid of some of those gallstones you formed from getting fat. No, you acknowledge the fact that weight loss is associated with, a purging effect, and it can be a problem.
Okay, but it is okay. Thank you for pointing out why it happens, but I have noticed that in a few.
Yes, it's not uncommon for people when they start detoxifying for a lot of the things that happened as a consequence of their poor habits to undo themselves. It happens slowly with feeding. It happens rapidly with fasting.
Good. All right. Thank you. Okie doke. Next question from Nat. I have a question for Dr. Goldhamer on fasting. Can a certain amount of fasting help with lowering certain hormonal levels? Can naturally high testosterone levels in women be decreased by fasting? I'm 24-year-old female having very pretty testosterone levels. Not sure what pretty testosterone
Pretty
levels.
elevated.
Maybe she forgot one word. Yeah, eating a predominantly whole food, plant-based, SOS-free diet for 6 years, getting enough sleep and exercise. I was also wondering if cortisol and adrenaline levels can as well be reduced by long-term fasting and have long-term effects on the body.
Okay, so cortisol definitely, there's even literature on the idea of excess cortisol production normalizing, with fasting, and whether it's too high or too low, and there's normalization of those functions can apparently occur. With elevated testosterone in females, I don't know that we've had objective evidence of that. I don't know if we've done if we've had any cases where that's been monitored. We do know that there'd be a mechanism to explain how it could normalize. I just don't know whether fasting specific for that. We do know that testosterone, estrogen, and other related hormones normalize with diet, sleep, and exercise. That patients that are adopting these diets oftentimes do normalize their hormonal function. We know that women that have fibrocystic breast disease, dysmenorrhea, menorrhagia, uterine fibroid tumor formation, et cetera, seem to be benefited. And the theory is that estradiol, the active estrogen hormone, which normally gets broken down to estriol and is excreted in the urine, that process gets interfered with in some women, and that fasting may help normalize that. It's affected by the liver, but also the bacteria that live in the gut. So when you get on a healthy diet, you get normal bacterial flora instead of the type of flora that harbors the gut of meat eaters. You may be able to break these hormones down more effectively. That may be one of the mechanisms. But remember, this is going to require some actual research. And nobody's doing research because none of the people conventionally managed are ever getting well. So, it's like, they're doing hormone research but not on people that are actually trying to get healthy. So I don't know that we can answer that specifically. And one way we could try it, though, is let's bring you in, do a fast and see if it normalizes. If it does, then we can write a case report up.
Okay. Well, thanks. All right. Let's see. Okay. We still got more. Give me a sec because they come in from a lot of different places. Sorry, it's just so many. Here we have one from Florence. Do you have a comprehensive list of tests we should ask our doctors? My primary care physician will order whatever I want and my insurance will pay for it. So I'd like to get a baseline level of things like vitamins and minerals or levels of TMAO or other things I may not know to ask about.
Yeah, in fact, we send people when we schedule them for a stay at the center, there's some baseline testing we do. It includes a CBC, a multi-chemistry panel, homocysteine is a screen for B12, 25-dehydroxyvitamin D, which is a screen for vitamin D levels, a CRP, which is C-reactive protein, which is associated with inflammation. We send them the list of those tests because some people can get them done before they come to the center and do it through their health insurance or HMO or whatever, and save $100 and not having to, or a couple $100 and not having to do testing. Other people, we just take care of it when they're there. So there are tests, but the problem is there's a lot of tests out there, and those are screening for fasting, but there are other tests that might be relevant to you. The best way to do that would be to do a consult with one of our doctors. They'll review your medical history. They'll tell you what tests would be most relevant to you. You can go get those tests ordered through your insurance or your Medicare. And then when the results come in, you can talk to our doctors to help you interpret them and from a health perspective, not just a disease screening perspective. And they can, advise you about, what the results are and what you need to do, more importantly, to get them to improve if necessary.
Okay, very cool. This is from Kelly. I was experiencing frequent UTIs and my urologist put me on D-mannose powder. It seems to be helping, but it's sugar. Should I be worried about that?
No, this is a very good, I'm surprised that urologists even knew to do this. That's great. Mannose is a sugar, but it's a sugar that's not absorbed by humans. And what happens, it goes into the bladder, the bacteria are attracted to it, and it allows them to be flushed out mechanically. And so it doesn't, you're not going to gain weight because you ate mannose, and it's not going to suppress your immune response because it's not a metabolized sugar by humans well. But it does work well in this response in terms of managing bladder infection, much better than loading up with antibiotics and other things. So it is something that we use, and it can be helpful. We still have to figure out why you're getting recurrent UTIs though. And that can have, it may be hydration issue, it may be immune suppression. There are, so even though mannose might help deal with the symptoms, it's not going to actually resolve the reason why you're getting bladder infection. So it's a little bit more to do on that work, but I definitely commend your urologist for being aware of a conservative option.
So like it wouldn't be like a trigger for somebody, you think?
No, it's non-metabolized sugar. Just it happens to work well for this particular application.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. This is a question from Laurel. She says, I am now hypothyroid despite being SOS-free and whole food plant-based for many years and a success, losing weight. I take levothyroxine daily, now 75 micrograms. My doctor, who is not plant-based, says it is not Hashimoto's. Can a medically supervised fast reverse hypothyroid? If so, how? What else can I do to get off this medication and reverse this condition? I eat dulse every day for iodine.
Okay, although most hypothyroidism is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, her doctor must have done antibody testing and not found that present. The problem is that can be modified by her diet. People that eat a health promoting diet tend to improve in terms of their thyroid and thyroiditis symptoms. So we don't know what took out the thyroid originally. In Hashimoto's thyroiditis, it's your immune system attacking your own thyroid. And so that's what causes it. And that's why fasting and diet can be very helpful. However, if you've destroyed enough of your thyroid over enough years, or you've been on thyroid replacement long enough, you may not be able to completely get off thyroid replacement and still have normal thyroid levels. The important thing is to be on the least amount that keeps you normal so that you don't get osteoporosis and problems from taking too much thyroid medication. We have a doctor on our staff, Dr. Chilla Varas, who's a woman naturopathic physician who does a lot of work with women that are struggling, trying to figure out how to get their thyroid balanced. And she's definitely a good resource because it is a little tricky and you do need to do some ongoing testing in order to know whether you've got things targeted exactly right.
Nice. She says her TSH is elevated, not her.
Right. So TSH is one test, but you also want to look at T3, T4, reverse T3. There's a whole series of tests that are done to help the doctor guide you in terms of how you can minimize the necessary replacement therapy.
Nice. Okay, here is a question from Linda. Are there some people who should not do fasting? Can fasting be a great first line of defense for someone with cancer? And can you open up a second clinic, as I have clients waiting until October trying to get into TrueNorth?
Yes, we have a couple plans to try to help make fasting more available. There are clinics now in Ohio and LA with doctors that we've trained. We have other doctors that are in the process of trying to open up clinics. We are trying to expand our existing facilities so we can accommodate people better, because it is true, we do have a wait list right now at TrueNorth Health. And I think that the publication of the research articles that we've just done and we're about to do will increase acceptance of fasting and increase the interest and demand. It's a little bit of a tough business model for doctors. It's high liability, high overhead, and low economic return, just because people have to be there a long time sometimes to get well. So they can only afford to spend, so much money on care. And so I don't think it's going to be super quick or simple. Just because of the economic and legal liability driving forces. But there will be more and more availability. We're also going to be operating what we call pop-ups, which are fasting operations in redundant capacity hotels and areas around the country, where we can use redundant capacity space so it can be affordable and run programs specifically for healthy people that are doing short-term fasting in order to stay healthy. So we'll be announcing that next year, and hopefully that will dramatically increase the number of beds that are available for a wider variety of people, take some pressure off the center, and allow fasting to become more readily available. What was the other part of that question?
About preventing cancer. Can fasting be used as a first line of defense in preventing?
I think it is. Diet,
cancer.
sleep, and exercise is the first line. Fasting is a way of facilitating that transition. And, if you don't want to get cancer, I mean, the only cure for cancer really is prevention. So don't smoke, don't drink, don't eat animal foods, don't eat sugar. Do get enough sleep, exercise, and fast every day for 12 to 16 hours, and perhaps occasionally for a longer period of time by coming to the TrueNorth or one of the facilities that does fasting supervision.
Well, if there's no money in water fasting because water's cheap, maybe you could start selling Prolon.
Yeah, well, I don't think so. I think our interest is in water only fasting, not fasting mimicking approaches.
I was kidding. Okay, you have no sense of humor. Okay.
I disagree. I have a very keen sense of humor. I crack me up.
Oh my God. Well, I want to thank Diane and Connie for their super chat donations. Thank you so much. This is from Marie. Can you ask Dr. Goldhamer a question about cholesterol? I recently bought a cholesterol monitor, which only measures total cholesterol, and I'm not sure how accurate they are. What would cause my readings to go from 3.6 a month ago to now 6.3? I'm wondering if processed foods such as bread or pasta could contribute. Anything to help it return quickly? Food, exercise?
Well, I mean, when you go through weight loss, cholesterol levels will often artifactually go up. We see that in fasting. And part of the reason is, think about it, what's inside your blood vessels? If it's cholesterol, fatty plaques, and you start breaking down those plaques from weight loss, where do you think the cholesterol is going to go? Into the bloodstream. So you may get an artificial temporary elevation when rapid weight loss is taking place. I have to say though, cholesterol itself there's some limitations to using cholesterol as a marker for an individual's health. There are other tests that are probably more sensitive indicators of health, including inflammatory markers like CRP. Cholesterol overall will go down when people adopt plant-based diets, if you look at them over the long run, but wait until you get them closer to optimum weight before you draw too many conclusions about temporary elevations in cholesterol levels.
Okay, so this question, it's a little bit long, but it's an important question because I always tell people, I think your diet that you recommend is the best and I follow it, but not everybody can. So I tell them do the least restrictive program you can do that will get you.
And why is it they can't follow a health promoting SOS-free diet?
Well,
I'm worried about getting too healthy.
Well, people tell me different reasons. Their family's not on board. They travel. They have stress. I hear every excuse in the book.
But people can travel. Do you travel?
Well, I don't since the pandemic, but I traveled for 10 years.
Were you able to maintain a health promoting diet when you traveled?
Yeah, if anything,
okay, so you did.
Oh,
so
yeah.
That's not a real reason. That's just an inconvenience. And have you ever had family members that weren't, and you do have now family members that aren't necessarily 100% compliant?
Yeah, my husband.
Well, that means it doesn't keep you from being compliant. So that's not a real reason why people get it. Makes it harder. It makes
I'm only telling you what I hear, or they're emotional eaters.
I'm trying. So people can't be emotional eaters, but eat a whole plant food SOS-free diet.
Listen, I agree with everything you say. I did what you said.
I just wonder about that. People say
they had childhood trauma. They have stress. Somebody in their family died. Their dog was sick. Their family doesn't support them. Their kids doesn't support them. I mean,
that's all true. And those things all make it more difficult. That doesn't mean they can't do it though. So we need to make sure people understand that yes, if you have childhood trauma and you have to travel and you have non-supportive and you have teenagers that live at home and you work at a place with, that's not supportive and you don't know anybody else in the world that actually understands this and your doctor's antagonistic, those things all make it more difficult. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It's a question of how much effort you have to put in and how you have to manipulate your environment to make those things happen. I've seen people with terrible emotional trauma that had difficult childhoods and lack of support and antagonistic histories, but they still are able to do it. So let's just say that if you have those disadvantages, it's really hard. Let's not say they can't do it.
Well, I've seen, you've probably seen this too. I've seen people make extraordinary efforts with their health, losing anywhere from 50 to hundreds of pounds to gain it back. It just seems hard for people to maintain this lifestyle.
Absolutely. It's very difficult to maintain it. Why? Because one of the things that motivate people to do this, for example, is pain. When people are in agonizing pain, they'll do anything. They'll even eat well in order to get rid of pain. When the pain goes away, it's like, oh, I'm better now. I don't have to do it. Or they're in psychological pain because they're having trouble with how they're, attracting mates or doing whatever it is they need to do. They accomplish the goal, and then the motivation tends to wane. So I agree. Adherence is a big problem. And it's mostly a problem because people live in a world designed to make them fat, sick, and miserable, and there's not the support around them. But one of the things they can do is try to figure out ways to get more support. Maybe they can join groups like you do, AJ, where they're getting ongoing education, inspiration, and support. Maybe cultivate some friends that are helpful and supportive. That might be useful. Or get rid of some of the negative influences in their life so that those energy vampires aren't always sucking them dry. But whatever it takes, being healthy and happy should be a priority. And if it is, figuring out how to adapt a whole plant food SOS-free diet is an important consideration, in my opinion.
Yep. Well, like my acting teacher used to say, how bad do you want it? Okay. So anyway, the point of that was this question from Judy was that she did my program, went from 22.5 to 20 from her BMI after minimally invasive bypass surgery to clear a 100% blocked LED. And she said, since then, she's made conscious modifications to her diet that made it sustainable for her. Now she's using flour from whole grains most days, Food for Life tortillas and breakfast cereals, no fat pita, whole grain pasta, adding a modest amount of salt to most meals, eating more sugar than previously, a few tablespoons of maple syrup, but still 100% oil free, and eating about the same quantity overall, although her proportion of leafy greens is diminished. And she said now her BMI is back up to about 21.
Of course, she's on the weight gain diet. She's on the diet that you would ask somebody to do that's trying to be sort of health conscious, but wants to gain as much weight as possible. Let's get the flour and sugar in there. Let's get rid of the greens, which prevent you from gaining weight. So she's proven the point that if your goal is to, kind of get on a sort of healthy diet, but to be overweight, you want to eat a lot of refined carbohydrates and salt and sugar. That's the best way to do it. And it works. It works very consistently. On the other hand, if you wanted to be leaner and meaner, then what you have to do is pump the fruits, the vegetables, the salad, particularly the greens. And, I don't know of any way to violate the laws of physics in thermodynamics, which means as long as she keeps eating the way that she's eating, she's going to keep getting fatter. And the moment she goes back to a whole plant food, minimally processed SOS-free diet, she'll be losing 1 to 2 pounds of weight down to her optimum weight.
Well, yeah, because she says that now, when she's adding these things back in, her cholesterol went up, her blood pressure went up, her weight went up. And so she says, I'm finding it hard to believe that the small amount of salt and sugar and flour I'm using can explain such significant changes. Am I in denial?
Yes, she's in denial. It was Mark Twain, the American philosopher, that said denial was not just a river in Egypt. She is in denial. She's getting substantial quantities of concentrated refined carbohydrates. We know that because she's able to gain weight. And it means she has good plumbing and, she's got good biology there because she's able to take these highly processed foods and store them as fat. And the way that she can prove this is just go exclusively whole plant food SOS free for 6 weeks. Look at the 12 pounds of weight that she's going to lose. And then she can get out of denial. She needs to eat more. She needs to sleep more. She needs to exercise more. And she needs to stop eating the foods that makes her fat.
Well, it's so interesting because, she says she's avoiding oil, which most of the people in our space know to do. But sugar and flour, they still have a fairly high caloric density. But can the salt itself contribute?
Yeah, the salt has a powerful passive overeating. And people say, well, how could salt make me fat? There's no calories in it. But it stimulates what's called passive overeating. Simplistically, if you just took, say, rice and you ate until you were satiated with rice, you'd eat a certain amount. If the next day, everything else being equal, you took rice and salted it up, you'd eat more before you felt satisfied. And so that extra 5 or 10% of calories that come from that artificial stimulation of dopamine that comes from the salt in the diet, that itself can make you fat. Although it's better if you combine that with highly refined carbohydrates like the tortillas and the flour products, because those products would taste like crap without the salt. And so as a consequence, it's easier to consistently overeat them. I wish that we were in the business of let's make people fat. It's so much easier. You could just tell people everything they're hearing on the advertising, just believe that, and just have them watch ads all day long, and then do what they're shown, and then they would get fat. And that's working great for over 2/3 of the population. You don't have to work with them. But the people that want to be thinner, that's the problem, because now they have to overcome all this conditioning and brainwashing and miseducation that they've given. And your patient here is an example of that. She has trouble believing just a little of this and a little of that would result in her being fat. But she's living proof of it. And she can be even better living proof by go back on the healthy diet, get rid of the crap that's making her fat and watch it come off. And then I want to hear what she has to say. I want to hear from her after 6 weeks of that, whether or not it works. I want to hear the person that tells me they've done it right and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I don't hear that. I hear they've done it right, but it's difficult.
Yeah.
And it's difficult not because they wouldn't do it if it was done for them. It's difficult because it takes effort, energy. It takes the social consequences. You know, if you had somebody on a deserted island and the only foods available were these foods, you would not have obesity.
Yep. Well, Connie says you speak the truth. You don't sugarcoat. You don't oil coat or salt coat either.
No sugar, oil, or salt. SOS-free.
Yeah. Okay. And Louise says, very grateful for your direct answers. This is something I wonder too, because I know someone who never smoked that has COPD. Yes. And Bonnie is asking, can a plant-based diet in general or water fasting in particular reverse COPD?
No. The damage that's already occurred probably isn't going to get undone. Now, it's true that people with COPD often function a lot better when they do this diet and they can breathe better, but it's not because they've reversed COPD. What they've done is they've gotten rid of inflammation. The existing capacity of respiration is improved. So yes, you can improve respiratory function, but it's not like you've regrown the little alveoli that have had their walls destructed because of the consequence. On the other hand, asthma, which is just one of those kind of autoimmune related conditions, improves dramatically with fasting and diet. In fact, most of our patients are able to eliminate the need for most asthma medications and most of the distress that they have with asthma. But they have to be willing to get rid of the dairy, the gluten, and the sugar in order to be able to achieve and maintain that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, those are all the questions that have been sent in. There's a bunch in the chat, but I think I want to respect your time. I know it's lunchtime at the TrueNorth Health Center, so maybe you'll just come back another time and do another.
I'd love to come back another time. We can answer other questions then, AJ. Thank you so much for having me on today.
Right. Just this one has been coming up quite a bit in the chat. So just briefly, maybe just talk about MS. Can that be helpful at all?
So multiple sclerosis is a condition where the myelin, the fatty coating of the nerve is lost, and it happens progressively. And it's a really difficult condition because at some point, some critical nerve function like respiratory function gets demyelinated and then you pass away. So the good news is Dr. Schwenk was a medical doctor that started studying this years ago, and he was able to show quite compellingly that dietary manipulation slowed the rate of progression in MS significantly. And his diet took into account some of the things that we advocate. We've obviously taken it even further, but a vegan SOS-free diet, in my experience, is very helpful with patients that have MS. It's slowing the rate of progression. We also use a little bit of fasting with MS patients, but not aggressively, because MS patients, if you get them weak, they're very slow to recover. So we're pretty conservative with our fast. We're generally not fasting more than a couple of weeks in MS patients. But the patients that I have now, that I've had some of them for 30 years, in many cases have not progressed much since they developed symptoms 30 years ago. So I don't think you can cure it, but what you can do is slow the progression. And I think that there's evidence to suggest that diet plays a dominant role in that. We don't have any studies on fasting, but hopefully someday we'll be able to prove that we can augment that additionally with fasting.
Well, this was great, Dr. Goldhamer. And if people want a lot of you, you're going to be coming in August with Dr. Lyle as part of the Reboot program that we offer twice a year, where you really do an extended Q&A. So get on my mailing list and we'll let you know about that. Thanks so much, Dr. Goldhamer.
It's my pleasure.
It's always great talking to you. Take care. Bye-bye. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is one of the most talented plant-based chefs, Kelly Williamson. She's going to be making plant-based gyros and pulled pork jackfruit. Take care, everyone. And please consider getting on my mailing list, because your questions really do get priority, because they come to a separate email that is not used for anything else but your questions. And when we have doctors like Dr. Goldhamer, Dr. McDougall on Monday, Dr. while on Wednesday. It really makes a difference. Also, it does help if you watch on YouTube. The reason being is I see different chats than you, and I can't really see Facebook and Twitter without jumping screens, which can risk me losing the chat. So the best place to watch, if at all possible, is YouTube. Please consider giving this video a like, sharing it, and maybe even subscribing to my channel. Take care, everyone. And